It's funny you asked to talk to Stefan because I wanted to talk to him for ages anyway. I saw a natural history, one of his pieces of Locus Plus, I think, based on Schnoll's lines. It was in '95, and for me it was a kind of inspiration of as to a kind of possible path that artists can take, which defies kind of art world stereotypes and allows for a kind of maybe a more considered interrogative approach to history and to practice. And it's quite wonderful to see this show here, which is like a kind of microcosm of the vocabulary of practice, but kind of obviously a new edition and evolving characteristics. So I suppose saying here it makes sense to talk about these first, which I understand is a single piece.
Yes, this is called Gentle Circuit, and it's kind of probably worth trying to talk about as a kind of a starting point, because the way the sort of research and the way ideas kind of evolve is hinted at is very important, and it's part of it. And it probably initially started probably has to be maybe 10 years ago, when I had this idea of using ties for something, and it actually did come from a piece of news where someone trying to illegally enter the country fell out of the wheel hatch of an aircraft, and it happened quite recently again. And that sort of was, I found, a very powerful kind of concept and idea that someone would do something like that to kind of move from one place to another. And he just kind of sat there, and I think that would be clipping in a box, and he just kind of sat there. And he went through lots of different stages. And eventually, this is when I was in London, and I moved to Yorkshire in 2000. And I started thinking it through again. And I kind of went down a path where I was just saying to David, I was thinking of actually recovering rubber from an airfield, from Manchester Airport, if I could. This idea of this kind of momentary contact of all these takeoffs, or mainly landings, where you kind of get this kind of impact, and this kind of material gets left on the runway, and I just kind of went nowhere, and no one really could tell me how we could do that. But through the contacts of Manchester, they said I should contact these people called Sky Wheels, and they service the tyres and brakes for these aircraft. Maybe you should go and see them. So I went along, and I was shown around the service area, and we came across these two tyres, and they offered them to me, and he told me they were from a DC-10 that was from a South African cargo plane, and they'd reached the end of their kind of use, and I could have them. So I got a van and I brought them back to Huddersfield, and they sat in my cellar for a further 5 or 6 years under the front room, and I kept having to move them around, and still not really knowing what to do with them. But knew they kind of had a loaded power. And I guess it was right the way through until January this year, talking to Tina Spear, who invited me to kind of do this show, and it was just through those discussions, this idea of the wheel kind of slowly turning, in conjunction with the piece that's kind of around the corner, the Hubble telescope, that there was some kind of connection between these two bodies, one kind of analog and one digital. And then this is when it starts getting difficult to actually pin down what's actually going on, because there is this kind of formal aspect and there's a kind of beautiful thing happens every now and again where you think it's stopped, where it's you look again and it's still moving, and I think it's somewhere within that physicality of that happening.
Represented back to us, and I suppose there's an interesting link with your other work in the. There's this. It seems to several times have adopted redundant technology, repurposed it, and brought it back, but in a kind of isolated it in a more considered way, so that it sits there as a brooding kind of presence. It was interesting. You were saying that you probably, well, these elements probably aren't the first things that you'd have access to if you in your life. The chance of ever being close to an object in isolation and considering it somehow having contained that experience. Is that outside the artwork that we have?
It's also this thing that's happening here as well now, because they're slightly out of true. This kind of the motor is now, it reaches a point where the tyre is not kind of straight truing us. Right. There's that kind of lovely tension in that as well. Which came as a kind of a surprise when we sort of talked through the idea of having these kind of revolving tyres, and the process then threw a number of kind of problems and issues, and led to the kind of the building of these frames and the collars as well, just to manage them, because they're actually wanting to travel sideways, and they've had to be kind of managed to in order to kind of live out the duration of the show within that kind of groove.
There's a restraint in the structure, isn't it? It seems that often you go for the most economic kind of elegant solution to a problem, rather than it's not a convoluted structure.
No.
But as you say, it's actually doing something quite complex, and it's interesting. But it allows the tyre to be the object of focus rather than the mechanism. And sitting down there, and the mechanism is lovely. It's kind of, I always enjoy things that are well made, but the whole point of this in a way is to understate itself, isn't it? So that you're there kind of confronted by the tyre almost on the plinth sitting in front of you.
I think it's also just a reactivation as well, as I said. I mean, they literally lived under the kitchen in the front room, and the sort of the key when it happened was it was like just such a lovely shock and surprise, because the last thing I thought of doing with them over those years was actually to make them animate.
Right.
Because I was constantly going through. I was being sort of led down the idea of reinterpreting them actually, and to break them and remake something else.
Right.
And
so they become raw material for something.
So yeah, it's because for such a long time it was material.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of went back to the idea of the kind of the skid marks on the track, which is the thing that was pulling, trying to pull this work through. So it was this kind of very heavy material.
It's interesting when you talk about dragging it around your cellar. I can just imagine the nightmare of having to move something like that.
Yeah,
but it's funny when it's raised up like this, moving at gentle speed. They don't exactly look light, but you don't consider the weight, And but it's, I don't know. It's interesting that you often kind of work with kind of heavy industrial redundant mechanisms and kind of trying to make them appear so that they're almost kind of spiritual entities. They're elegant and they're kind of contemplative, silent often. And I wondered if somehow it's important that these things are here kind of as the kind of quiet elements away from the chaos of their function.
Yeah, well actually there's Ali who had the show prior to myself, and one of the first things he said was it was more to do with the absence of the rest of the plane, that kind of sort of shocked him in a way.
Yeah.
And it is that the sort of the isolation from it's kind of good. It's like it is someone sat down and had to make a drawing in some technical environment to how you make something withstand the impact of an aircraft or thousands of whatever to land and to be safely repeatedly. And I think again that is kind of somehow to do with that kind of track back into its original purpose.
So the redundancy is important, but the history is as well.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's kind of got the scars. There's various kind of cuts and grooves in it. So obviously these are to do with various places and various times.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the other thing. Yeah, there's kind of time. There's such a strong time element, not just within these circuits that there's sort of this slow evolving mass. It's kind of a record of time and place.
Yeah.
And that would have been lost if I chopped them up and done whatever, what they made to them.
It sort of reminds me of, I don't know, there seems to be a sense of kind of melancholy and mortality about what you do. By presenting it here at the end of its life, but also the fact you mentioned the amount of effort and labour that goes into making it in the first place.
Yeah.
The fact that it's lost all function, but it's now got a record like the human skin or like some other kind of element which is very anthropomorphic.
Yeah. But also just there's something it's also to do with it being dormant as well, which as I was talking about there was the kind of the fact that it was dormant for all those years, or you had a use and you had a very dynamic use and you had a very functional use. And as kind of artists and people who make things or have these ideas, it's kind of interesting to kind of regenerate it, what else held in such a formal shape, but the fact that it was dormant for a period of time after that, and then it becomes this 10 years later.
So there's some form of celebration and reanimation.
Sort of, yeah.
Do you know anything about the graffiti? I'm wondering more.
Yeah, no, well, I think these must maybe be the people in Skywheels, because the Skywheels written on it somewhere, and I think it's probably the guys who, I don't know. And the other thing was about cleaning them up, because we thought, do I clean them up or do we not? And if we're not, then we leave everything. Or, but I think to clean them up would have been a big mistake. So they have there's the kind of, as I rolled them out of the storeroom in Manchester, this is more or less the way they were. Just literally removed all the cobwebs and the insects that were living in it. But no, this is as they more or less as I kind of got possession of them.
Some of your other projects where you've repurposed elements of industrial hardware, they've had a very specific political presence, elements of Russian submarines or kind of processes with kind of objects which are loaded with a very specific historical context. And with these, they're anonymous. You track them back to being a DC-10 and South African truck cargo. But was it an important departure in a way to kind of isolate this formally from some of the narratives which you worked with previously?
Yeah, no, I think because there has been there's kind of been a gap as well within my practice as well, and in a way it's perfect. It seemed very natural actually to sort of have a move into to kind of present something that I had. There's kind of something very poetic about these that I found anyway, and I think that was, and I like to think there's something very poetic in the works that you're kind of touching on. But I think this has kind of gone far more than many of those other works in that way. And it's just, you know, the fact that there's so many, you know, there's a history of work with holes in, and not very simple, but, you know, there's this kind of strange referencing to something else outside of the way that I normally. But I mean, they are still loaded with the
they are
with the history, I think.
And I think that the interesting thing about the works which reference the Cold War is that they're essentially about human narratives within this meta-narrative. You know, it's about focusing in on the individual or on in a way the poignant redundancy of the endeavour for human beings within a meta-narrative rather than the Cold War as a whole. But I suppose that in this case what we're looking at in a way is an infinitely complex, ambiguous set of narratives.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of really also locks into journeys between places, which is very kind of deep in the kind of the sort of context history of my father being Ukrainian and being a refugee and ending up in this country. So there's always been there's kind of a base level of dealing with two places. And I think, you know, these two ties in a way do have that. They are kind of loaded. And again, you know, this poor individual who fell out of the undercarriage initially it was to do with someone finding themselves in a position where they wanted to go somewhere else for whatever reason, and there being this terrible thing happened. And you know, to be honest, I think that there's somewhere deep within that is that I think that is kind of, you know, maybe it's worth noting.
It makes sense that there's it was interesting with the boy and with the novels that they had to travel once they were made.
Yes.
And with this, I suppose, in a way, the mileage is embedded within it.
Yeah.
It can be quite static, but it represents that huge kind of traversing landscape. Do you want to kind of explain what's going on here?
As I said earlier on, actually, with I think in 2000 since about 2003, I've made a kind of quite a large series of wide-frame animations, and I've been wanting to create a series of these animations, and they've gone everything from there's a motorway bridge which is kind of just outside Huddersfield on the M62 to a television mast again near Huddersfield, right the way through to a piece I did called Apollosaurus, which is very much linked with this. And it's I don't know, I think it's very much about again, it's about stuff really, it's stuff that's out there, and the relationship you build it with thinking about them, but not really fully understanding or having a real total kind of comprehension about what they are. But they're sort of part of the things you're interested in, and part of the things that kind of are happening there. And when I talk to Tino, the Hubble this is a representation of just as this high, and I think it's now 20 years that it kind of, I think it's 20 years ago that it kind of went, and the fact that it's looking right the way back into time. I discussed with Tina and that I was very interested in doing this, and I was very interested in it being a part of that series of animations, and that it should be tumbling and falling, so that in a way, rather than it having this gaze sort of in a very specific pointed way, it was somehow out of control, but it would also be turning a bit like the tides, so there was some kind of narrative, even though they're separate pieces of work, it kind of came sort of quite quickly, this idea that they would somehow be saying something to each other. You know, and this thing is travelling, you know, it's 120 miles above us, and it's every 90 minutes, and it does a circuit, and it's just, and I don't fully understand it, and I don't fully understand how it works, but I'm sure we've all seen the images that this thing kind of has given to us, and how it's kind of opened a window into this other place, this kind of distant place.
It looks like it's lost.
Yeah,
It's been abandoned.
Yeah.
It's no longer functional.
Yeah. Well, I think that's you're right. It is that it's kind of chaotic all of a sudden, which it isn't. I mean, apart from when they kind of made the lens was incorrect when it first went up, so that it was kind of out of focus, which I think is kind of really powerful. The fact that this kind of object was put out there to photograph the edge of time was made with a flaw in it, and you know that's what kind of makes it real somehow. It's this kind of flaw that, with all the intention and all the planning and all the things that was going into making, you know, that goes into making this, had this incredible flaw, which was, it wasn't to do with the electrics, it's to do with the actual thing that was going to send back the pictures. And I think as a flaw, that's such a powerful thing for that project to become. And of course they sorted it out, and they went up and they put the right lens in.
It makes it more believable in a way.
Yeah, it's sort of, because it's almost like we could have taken it on trust that they'd done, that was done.
I suppose that's the funny thing, isn't it, because the series of animations is quite wide, isn't it? It kind of includes a whole range of structures and vehicles and objects, which most of the time we would take on faith existed, but not actually see in real life, you know. The Tomahawk missiles and that kind of thing, and that you've got objects which were designed to kind of epitomise the kind of aspirational hope for humanity or terror, you know, and both function very effectively as ideas which can never be tested or disproven, you know. Funny thing about the whole is that I believe that the images that come back from it are artificially coloured.
Oh yeah, they're all altered.
Yes.
So we can read them.
That's right. So you have this kind of strange thing where it's kind of out there, you know, kind of offering us a window onto our own history, but it's entirely synthesised. It's about how much we trust those that mediate it, as to whether it's been doctored in an appropriate way or in a way that actually adds or changes history.
Well, it's what we find beautiful, which is what I think is more the point, is that, you know, the images are beautiful, but that's the way you've got to do it. But and you said earlier on, in a way, this kind of the tumbling as well. And I have to say as well, this isn't a DVD, this is a program, so it's actually non-repeatable. This is just kind of in its own time is doing this. It'll never do it again, or more or less. It's kind of, we're seeing it now as we'll never see it again, which kind of again creates that strange dimension with it kind of circling the earth and right now. And again, it's that sort of trust. It's sort of in that realm of, you know, I've just said that it could be on a DVD, but everyone's just kind of taking on trust again that it's not essentially programmed, but it is actually in real time.
I think what you said about it being lost is important. It feels. I was saying before, it reminds me of I can't remember if it's Viking or Voyager that, you know, kind of continued beyond the solar system, and eventually it would lose power as well beyond the point where we send a signal back. But you have this kind of, I think there's an interesting thing about our generation in terms of growing up through this kind of sceptical belief in space, you know, kind of exploration. And you know, we were saying last time we met, our children probably wouldn't understand the idea of Cold War. But, you know, when I was a kid, I read When the Wind Blows, and terrified for the next 5 years or so. But now it would be very hard for any young child to have that sense of fear and awe at the same time as being entirely enticed by the absolute wonder of this first exploration, very primitive exploration of space. This does feel like it's kind of looking forward to the end of that life for that object.
I mean, it's also just the way it's kind of written about as well in that word. I don't know, it's 13 billion light years it can now, which, doesn't, what does that mean? It's kind of crazy, but it's, it just kind of pushes that belief to a, you can only read it and just digest it. You can't. I can't.
No, we're not allowed to copy it.
It's just too far.
But as a construct, it's useful, isn't it? It's useful in that it gives us faith, or it keeps us in line, depending on which way it is.
Kind of men walking around on the moon or doing whatever, and I think it's kind of, that's all kind of planted in there. As a kind of a, because as a 13-year-old, I mean, I can't really know what that sort of meant in a way. It was exciting when we landed on the moon. I think by the time it came to the end, I was totally blasé that this is it's how you can take it as read.
But there's a certain there's a poignancy to remembering being emotionally involved, isn't it? Because now the experience of the Apollo missions is more about kind of a conspiratorial skepticism, enjoying the amazing possibility of fabrication and the ridiculous improbability of that, and actually made it there and came back. But remembering that position of being kind of emotionally open to it, as well as being sceptical. It's kind of interesting.
It's also interesting, that sort of contradiction as well, because the idea of space exploration in the future has now become this nostalgic past.
Yeah, exactly.
It's now become a digital. It's just a concept, but we think about it, with this kind of nostalgia. And,
totally.
And it's like the future is now the past. It's almost like a J.G. Ballard idea.
But this thing is searching for the past. This thing is searching for something.
Exactly. I was going to say, in a way, it's kind of the line's being
That's
drawn.
the interesting thing. It's not about the future anymore. It's all about the past.
There's a romance, isn't there?
I feel this makes me think about black. What this is looking for. I mean, the whole universe permeated with light energy, but you can only see it when it actually strikes against something. So this thing is looking for these little tiny moments where light from millions of years ago has been reflected back, and here it is in this. It is lost, and it's like it's lost in total blackness.
Yes, it is. But even within the program, it's lost.
Yeah.
There's no way out. It's kind of, as long as it's running, the lack of narrative, is kind of, it still kind of shocks me in a way.
Is the process important? I mean, I was wondering, because you've worked with these wireframe animations before, but you've worked with a whole range of incredibly complex and daunting processes, from huge scale casting through to kind of like massive projection systems and this kind of algorithmic generated content. Is the process something you find yourself fetishizing and enjoying, or is it something you keep
it's generally enjoyable? No, it is. It's always. I'm always. I was always surprised how amenable people were and friendly and open to. If you kind of approach people for help. I mean, this is what's this from the European Space Agency?
Yeah, this it's actually came from NASA because it's a joint program, isn't it?
So this was free to use. So it's kind of, so in a way we've sort of taken something which is part of that whole thing and clicked it into something else.
Yeah. And the
I think
choice
that's
of
what it's
wireframing rather, because obviously there was a point at which schematics like this were really the only way to view a 3D construction that complex. But now that we have the possibility of generating, you know, kind of multi-layer rendering on the fly, and kind of cinematic effect, but you've shied away from that and retained the simplicity of the schematic.
Yeah, I think just keeping it as the skeleton keeps it the thing. You know, I don't want to illustrate it somehow, or I don't know if this is, maybe this is illustration, I don't know, but it's somehow, there was one of the animations which we covered for the Vengeance project, and all the rest of being wireframe, and the Vengeance really worked beautifully, but there's something within this skeletal form that keeps it from being the thing as well.
Yeah.
It kind of it's a step outside itself all the time.
So in a way we're too familiar with the rendered version of the illustration, so we lose our innocence when we look at it.
Yeah.
It's kind of closer to the idea.
Yes.
It is,
Because it's like an outline and like a diagram, so it's closer to the essence of the idea.
Yeah. And we've for most of the animations, you know, it was kind of getting plans from the various people who had blueprints, and they were then converted into. So that was always really nice when you kind of ended up using source material.
Yeah.
And you know, for the TV mass in the early 70s, and we this sort of gave, we sort of had plans, and it's sort of you're kind of using again. It's a bit like the you know, whoever did the tire on the drawing board. It goes back to this drawing.
Well, that's the funny thing with this, isn't it? Because when I first looked at it, my eyes were doing something very odd, and I'm sure I was looking at it thinking, God, how do you do the perspective like that? You know, it's all inverted, and of course my eyes for some reason were reading the back face forwards and the other way around.
Just some very odd tricks.
And you know, you resolve it and you realise what you're doing, and it makes sense. You don't see it again like that. But it is interesting. The reason for that, of course, all the lines are the same width, aren't they? It has no mass and no perspective scale on any of the marks, so it defies our attempt to, in a way, draw it from the idea into the real world. It's simply there as a mathematical series of points, without any kind of aesthetic kind of embellishments or any kind of contextualization. Maybe makes it easier for people to appropriate and to apply to their own imagination than if it had already been completed through somebody else's imagination. We didn't mention this, it's just sitting there. But
yeah, no, it sits there.
It does. And I suppose the thing about this, kind of talking about this kind of, because your journey with animation has been through 10 years of this technology, hasn't it? So it's like being from the infancy of 3D rendering through to something which is now kind of well within the capacity of a Mac Mini or a laptop. But over here we have something where the technology has been pretty much static since its invention. It's the most advanced piece of kit in the room, but it's the most low tech.
Well, actually, that is 50 years old this year. Yeah. Is the parachute, and I was actually from the bought from the States, so it's American, and sort of only kind of, to be honest, sort of in retrospect, because it does tie in with recent work which are collages, and there's a kind of the history of kind of works which have dealt with Cold War and have dealt with that history and technologies, and this again, the parachute as an idea or as an object has been has been sort of developing itself. And really, with this, it was literally just pinning this parachute between the ceiling and the floor.
Right. So kind of in flight.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, all three works are taking this kind of aviation, this idea of flight, but this is, in some way, this is the most kind of sort of panicked piece in a way.
As an object, it appears quite domestic, doesn't it? As a kind of small rucksack, without you didn't understand what it was.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about parachutes is that they're either for that emergency that people hopefully will never ever use. You know, my granddad was in the Air Force in the war, and afterwards he didn't want to fly in the plane with high octane fuel again.
No.
But he used to drag gliders around Lancashire to get a flight every so often. He'd always wear a parachute, and of course he'd never jumped out of a glider with a parachute. And you always wore it, hoping you'd never use it.
Yeah.
And for the military purpose, there was this idea that you'd have thousands of troops landing across Europe as paratroopers. And apart from a few disastrous attempts, it was very rarely done as actual.
Well,
a mode of conflict.
Well, this is actually this is an Air Force, and it's actually an emergency shoot. So
right.
It's kind of right in there with its description is the kind of anxiety, which is really what kind of hooked me into it, is the anxiety of that, and especially what happened to our Austrian friend last week who jumped. I don't know if.
That's right.
I was kind of watching that, I mean that sort of came about after we installed the parachute where I've forgotten what height it was now. Do you remember?
23 miles.
23 watt. Yeah. Yes. 28, yeah. So there's this. So that was a kind of an after effect of. It's kind of a very strange thing of that kind of leap from that height. But it is to do with anxiety and to do with falling, I guess, and flying.
And this feels like a sort of desperate kind of act of reparation. Quickly get this, get him back and giving up. I mean, I'm sort of anthropomorphising it probably too much, but it feels like it's anxiously trying to kind of.
Yeah. It is an anxious piece of work. I mean,
it also has a relationship to the body as well. Like the other pieces, it's something to strap on.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to.
No.
Even the thought of jumping out of it.
No. Or being, just the kind of the sequence of events that you'd have to go through to sort of use it are sort of terrifying. But there is, and it's funny because it was actually lower down as well earlier on, so it was actually more in.
It's creeping up.
Yeah, it did, and it sort of, when it was sort of at a height that was kind of corresponding to myself. It was a whole different thing, but there was something about it just even being extra 2 feet higher. Just kind of sort of heightened the effect. Yeah, the anxiety just heightened.
And in terms of this actual piece, it simply is propped. There's nothing holding it.
It's just literally those, for nearly a month now. It's kind of just sat there. But and again, because it's kind of interesting because it was the piece that took the longest to kind of sort out, and it was literally, it was looking at the gaps in the planks in the wood flooring that almost made it happen. It was literally wedged in on those spaces between the floorboards.
Just friction.
Sorry?
Just friction.
Yeah. And again, there's no screws, there's no nails, so it's kind of just. It's kind of
precarious.
Yeah. It could. I thought we may have had problems with it, but it's actually stayed incredibly. Well, it has. It's just stayed there.
It's quite a nice way to bring it around. These kind of objects which are just incongruously big when they're close up. From a distance they make sense. The plane tires, and this, of course, which is entirely beyond the scope of our realm, and you've got something so domestic, which is the sum of all fears for people involved in that issue. And even if you never fly, you have this. We've all seen the films where the person's lost in the canopy of the tree coming down, the poignancy of it not working, of the fear of the parachute not opening. It just reminds you how fragile.
But it's amazing, but also just in the way the thing's constructed. This is 1952.
Yeah, right.
And if you go back 10 years, they're so different. The Second World War, in the Second World War, and I think the things that were going on politically in terms of particularly East and West, as in this, this is the kind of the lineage to the space race and the kind of the military kind of stampede that was going on also led to ultimately safer and better parachutes.
That brooding paranoia led to huge advances.
Yeah, and it is that it's kind of fed by this again by anxiety. There's this kind of a period of time of this anxiety, and through that anxiety and the kind of developments in terms of altitude and etc. Things get moved on. Like again, the tyre, it wasn't invented as it is there, and this is already old. This is kind of.
It's funny how anything that relates to the physical world is beginning to look inherently old-fashioned, isn't it? And the idea of jumping out of a supersonic aircraft with a parachute just seems so ridiculous now, doesn't it? You somehow climb out of the canopy at Mach 3 and drop down. There's a kind of innocence to it that's again poignant. It's this kind of, I don't know, the kind of
the time.
Yeah, the elegance of this kind of human hope in the midst of something which we look back at as now kind of a very bleak time. It's kind of,
There is one aspect of it which is quite comical of the work, and I think all the pieces are really powerful and really strong. But I think that there's the absurdity of the tyres turning, albeit very slowly, but they ain't going nowhere. And that somehow, despite the scope of what that's all about and what it represents, it also has a kind of like a screensavery quality to it. But that's really the point in a very interesting way, because then it creates a tension, between all the big stuff we've been talking about and something that belongs to a totally different realm, and that's quite nice. And so it runs through all the pieces in different ways.
And this represents a new way of working for you.
Oh, this is the way to go. This is my future.
Thanks for talking us through the exhibition.
Thank you.